And good evening, everybody. Kalispera, shalom. And on behalf of Pauline Rockman, my co-president at the Melbourne Holocaust Museum, we are delighted to welcome everybody here tonight. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders in our community, the Holocaust survivors, who are the inspiration behind this beautiful museum, which will open to the public hopefully in July. So a very warm welcome, kalos irfate, to our Greek friends who are here this evening, including, I have a whole lot of amazing people who have come: Andrew Giacamos, Costa Marcos and Theo Marcos, Nick Dallas, Magdalena Simons, Costa Surfas, Vicky Kritzis, Olivia Nico, Jim Claven, and Elizabeth Yeretsikis. Thank you all very much for coming tonight. And Judy Feder from the Jewish Community Council of Victoria, and I hope I haven't left anybody out. And a special thank you to Chrissa and Jim Anaganusto, who hosted a lovely evening for Leon at their home last night. So before I introduce Leon to everybody here, I would like to acknowledge that we are in the midst of a very important week of remembrance. Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, was last week. Yom HaZikaron, Israel's National Memorial Day, is this evening, and tomorrow we commemorate Anzac Day, when we remember all the Australians who served and died in all wars, conflicts and peacekeeping operations. So could we stand for just a moment's silence in memory of all those who have fallen in war and conflict. So thank you. So Leon, welcome to Australia for the first time, and thank you for coming to Melbourne. As you probably all know, Melbourne is home to the largest Greek-speaking population outside of Europe and has strong connections. We have very strong connections to Greece. In fact, Melbourne and Thessaloniki have enjoyed a sister city relationship for more than 30 years. Dr Leon Saltiel was born in Thessaloniki, Greece. He graduated with honours from the Department of International and European Studies at the University of Macedonia and continued his studies at the Department of International Relations in Georgetown University, where he was also a Fulbright Scholar. Leon holds a PhD in modern Greek history at the University of Macedonia, focusing on the Holocaust of the Jews of Thessaloniki. Dr Saltiel has also published articles in important academic journals. His publications include The Holocaust in Thessaloniki, Reactions to Anti-Jewish Persecution, which won the 2021 Yad Vashem International Book for Holocaust Research. And Do Not Forget Me, 3 Jewish mothers write to their sons from the Thessaloniki Ghetto. Leon is also a member of the Central Board of the Jewish Communities of Greece, and he is a member of the Greek delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA, where Pauline and I met him as delegates for the Australian government. Leon currently serves as Director of Diplomacy, representative at the United Nations in Geneva and UNESCO, and he is the coordinator on countering antisemitism for the World Jewish Congress. So the format for tonight will be as follows. Leon will give a 35 to 40 minute presentation about the Jews in Thessaloniki from antiquity to today, and then we would like to invite questions from the audience. And then after we've discussed the Greek part, we're going to move to the modern times, and I'm going to ask Leon to tell you a little bit about his current role as Director of Diplomacy at the United Nations. So Leon, welcome to Melbourne. Please come to the stage.
Thank you so much, Sue. It's my first time in Australia, my first time in Melbourne. I've been in Melbourne only for a few days, and I have so many friends and so much people I've been meeting, both for the Greek communities and the Jewish communities. I really feel like home. So really, thank you so much for the welcome. Thank you, Chris and Jim, for the lovely evening last night. Thank you, Carol, also for hosting me. Judy, from the director of the Jewish community of Victoria, thank you. It really has been an amazing experience for me, and I will leave with very good memories. I'm so happy to see so many Greek and Jewish leaders tonight here. My focus will be a sad story, the Holocaust of the Jews of Greece, but that's why I didn't want only to speak about the Holocaust. I want to speak about more than 2,000 years of Greek-Jewish coexistence in the Greek space to show the richness of the relationship and to bring this relationship all the way to today. I was invited initially to come to Australia by the Greek Consul General in Sydney. I was there last week. I spoke twice at the university, met many Greek and Jewish leaders. I was interviewed in the press. I met the Archbishop, Makarios. And when I was preparing for this trip, even when it was a dim idea, I asked Sue in Göteborg. I said, if I come to Australia, what do you suggest? You come to this museum and you give a lecture. And that actually was confirmed before even the Sydney part was even an idea. So I just want to show you how ahead Sue and the Holocaust Museum of Melbourne are. So thanks, Sue and Alex, for also hosting me and welcoming here in Melbourne. So I will go with my presentation, then I'll show you a little clip, and then we can have our discussion. So this is a picture of 4 Holocaust survivors from Thessaloniki. It's a very well-known photograph. You can see it at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. It's as you can see, they look at you. It makes it very powerful. The ones who sit, if you want to sit, I think there are empty chairs. Feel free to sit if you need to. I like to start the presentation because, it's an audience of course, here of Jewish people and Greek people, and of course, maybe, I'm sure others, but, it's not evident how come Jews end up in Greece. It's not something that it's everyday knowledge. So this is a painting that you can find in the Museum of the Vatican. It's Alexander the Great in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. And really, for me, that symbolized the beginning of this journey of when Palestine and the Jews living in the biblical space, in the biblical lands, they become part of the Hellenic Empire. And this is really the beginning of the osmosis between the Hellenism and Judaism. And Winston Churchill famously said, you cannot understand the Western civilization without knowing Athens and Jerusalem. So really, for me, this is the beginning of Western civilization, when Hellenism meets Judaism. And of course, the Jews of Greece are people who, once Palestine becomes part of the Hellenic Empire, they move to what is today Greece, the Greek space of antiquity. And those Jews, they're called Romagnot, and they still exist in some communities in Greece, and they were Greek-speaking, and they're still Greek-speaking. So they precede the division between Ashkenazim and Sephardim that you may have heard. Of course, the Jewish community knows that, but these are Jews who are even before that. They're Greek-speaking and have really integrated into the Greek culture. And you have proof of their presence in Greece in the New Testament. Paul sends the epistles, the letters to the Thessalonicians. He preached for 3 Sabbaths in Salonika, where he found organized Jewish communities, and also in other Greek cities, again, to the synagogues, which is the beginning of Christianity, coming out of those Jews who were living in the Greek space. Now, those communities were small, and they lived in the Roman Empire, eventually the Byzantine Empire. The big change happened in 1492. King Isabella of Spain decided to expel all Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. And many of these Sephardic Jews, these are now the Spanish-speaking Jews coming out of Spain, they found many of them shelter in Thessaloniki, or Salonika. And these Salonika at the time is part of the Ottoman Empire, of course. And here you can see some of the roots. And really, those Spanish-speaking Jews coming to Thessaloniki transformed the community and the whole Balkan Peninsula. These are just some photographs from the 19th century. You know, very important rabbis, port workers, even had the fire brigade, teachers, culture. Really, the Jews of Salonika became a community of their own, a very unique community. I believe it was the only city in Europe with a Jewish majority, meaning Jews were not just living in a small village and being, a minority. They were a majority, and the city was running by the Jewish community. They were speaking Spanish, Judeo-Spanish. That was their language they were speaking among themselves. And the non-Jews of the city had also to speak Spanish in order to participate in the commercial life. Thessaloniki is an important port city, but also connecting the whole Balkan Peninsula, a lot of trade, a lot of commerce, but also the Jews were also pioneers of innovation. So many of the innovations from the West was coming to the Greek space through the Jews. For example, the first ones to publish a newspaper and to introduce typography were the Jews. Even socialism, labor rights, something that today we take for granted, 5 days a week and 8 hours a day work. That was not so obvious then, and it was the Jews who did the first demonstrations for worker rights and labor rights in the late Ottoman Empire, right before the city became part of modern Greece, which is in 1912. So really, in 1912, so like 110 years ago, the Jews of Thessaloniki, from being citizens of the Ottoman Empire, now become citizens of the Greek state. There were Jews in the Greek state beforehand because, as you may know, in Greek history, Greece develops already from 1830, when it's the establishment of the independent Greek state, first in the Peloponnese, then eventually a bit more north, until it reached Thessaloniki. So there are small Jewish communities, but really for the Greek state, it's also a big change when you have to integrate a city with such a vibrant and important Jewish presence. That few years haven't been without trouble. 5 years after the city joined the Greek, was liberated, as we say, there was a big fire that burned most of the historical center, making thousands of Jews homeless. And you can see some of these pictures. I don't know if there's a pointer here. I don't think there's a pointer. So you can see in the north a lot of the burnt urban space. And following that, the city also goes into a lot of reconstruction, that you have the modern city that you can visit today. That was more of the old Ottoman city that was burned. And that was the port area where a lot of the Jews were living. That's a map that shows you the burnt area. Again, the majority of the homeless were Jews. This space is important here. This space here that you can see, it says cemeteries, and that is a Jewish cemetery of the city, which is outside of the city walls. You can see cemeteries all around, and we'll discuss it after when we go to the Second World War period, and you'll understand why I'm highlighting it. So really, after this time and the fire, first of all, the city center has a new redesign plan, but also a lot of these homeless Jews have to be sheltered, and the city expands both eastwards and westwards to host a lot of the people who lost their homes. And it's the beginning of the expansion of the city beyond the traditional walls of the old city. And this is also, the period of the First World War, 1917, where also a lot of Anjaks are not only in Salonika, but also around Salonika. And one of the reasons where they claim that fire was so devastating is because, first of all, as you can see, it's August. We all know in August in Greece is very warm. It was very hard to have water. And also you had almost, I think, 500,000 of Allied soldiers based in Thessaloniki during this period, because it was one of the fronts of the First World War that was made very hard to find the water supplies. In 1922, we have the war between Greece and Turkey. You all know about that. It ends with 1923, the Lausanne Treaty, which also stipulates an exchange of populations based on religious conviction. So Christians leave Asia Minor And they settled, many of them settled in Thessaloniki, coming from modern-day Turkey. And also the city changes. And I have some numbers here, we'll discuss it later on. So in 1912, when the Greek army entered the city, out of around 150,000 people, 80,000 are Jews. And by the eve of the Second World War, the city has expanded to 250,000, but the Jewish population has gone down to around 50,000. Again, with different waves of migration based on, we discussed the fire, the economic crisis in 1929, and we'll see some other events. This is a little bit of a map showing you this population development in the city, which by the, Muslims had to leave, Jews were victims of the Holocaust, and after the war, the city is a majority Christian city. The 30s was an interesting period. Here you have, in Thessaloniki, there was the creation of some organizations mimicking the fascism, sort of like following fascism, that were openly anti-Semitic as well. They are known as Tria Epsilon, the 3 E's. And there was a big problem for the Jewish community. So much so that we call it the pogrom of the Hampel district. There was a district in Salonika which they burned, and the Greek government had to send the army to stop the riots. And these are some of the Jews who are left homeless from those incidents. And again, this was another wave of migration. Many of them, following these events, they moved to Palestine because many of these were poor port workers, and Israel didn't exist at the time, but of course it was developing, and they wanted to develop the ports. So many of these port workers from Salonika go and settle in Haifa and Tel Aviv and build the ports in Palestine, because was a very strong community of port workers, very poor, but knew how to run a port, knew the trade. This is Ioannis Metaxas, which is a very interesting figure in the modern Greek history because he was a dictator, but he's also a national hero. And here you see him being, he was a follower of Mussolini, and you can see people around him waving in the fascist way, but he was anti-Semitic. And in fact, he banned, and you can see him again in another picture, and he actually banned this organization that I spoke about, the Tria Epsilon. And actually, the Jews were very happy under Metaxas because he really took care of their needs, and he really integrated them more into the country. He's well known because when in 1940 Mussolini decided to invade Greece, he said the very famous no, Ochi, which is the anniversary we celebrate. It's a national day, the 28th of October 1940. It's a national anniversary day for Greece, the Ochi of Metaxas. So Mussolini invades, and the Greek army defends Greece, and we have the war in Albania in 1940-1941, where Jews and Christians, Greek soldiers, fight arm to arm, and really the Jews really wholeheartedly went to the national effort, and they died for their motherland. There were almost 10,000 Jewish soldiers fighting with the Greek army. One of the first officers to fall in the front was a Jewish Romagnot officer from Halkida. The name was Mordechai Frezi, who is a national hero for Greece, and he's very well known in Greece. So the Greeks, although very ill-equipped compared to the fascist Italy, they're able to resist, and you see the terrain, it's in the mountains, it's with snow, it's in the middle of winter, but they're very successful. And that's a cartoon of the period where you have the little Greek soldier and the big fascist, the big fat fascist opponent, and the Italians lost the war, and you see the Nazis overlooking, and they are concerned about the Axis powers, about the prestige of the ally. So Germany, although they didn't want to, they decide to also invade Greece in order to protect the prestige of the Axis. And this is what happens. And of course, a superior German army is invaded Yugoslavia. They took Yugoslavia in a few days, I think in a week. and then they enter through the north, and they occupy eventually the whole of the country. So April 1941 is when the country falls under the Axis powers. This is an interesting map that will also help understand some of the things I'm going to say. The Germans kept territories that were important to them. So unfortunately, Thessaloniki fell under the German control. You know, these accidents of geography that also mark the fates of people, that's one of them. They also took a strip of land that borders with Turkey. Turkey was neutral, so they want to control that corridor. Some big islands in the Aegean, the port of Piraeus, and also Crete. So really, the strategic assets so that they can control their space. The Bulgarians take the territories in green, and not only they take the territories, but they annex them. So they make them official Bulgarian territory. And in fact, the first Jews to be deported from Greece are by the Bulgarians in March 1943. We'll go to that. The rest of the territory, the rest of the country goes to the Italians that you have with light blue. In dark blue, you have the Dodecanese Islands and Rhodes. You may all know Rhodes, the big one. These were Italian territory even before. They were given to Greece after the war from the Allies. But during the war, they were Italian, and they remained Italian. Of course, this changes after Italy loses the war, and in November 1943, the whole of the country is under the Germans. But in the period I'm going to discuss, this is the reality. Another thing that's interesting here, you have this little green line going a little bit outside of Thessaloniki. The Bulgarians in the summer of 43 took parts of the German zone because, you know, the Germans, they didn't want to have all their troops and resources to control Greece. They had other strategic interests. So everything they can leave to the Allies or even to collaborators, they're willing to do so to free up their own manpower elsewhere when they needed it. Now, some of the dates of the events I'm going to narrate, but let me put some water with your permission. So we saw in 9 of April 1941 that the German army entered Thessaloniki, and they stay until the 30th of October 1944. In July 1942, we have the first mass anti-Semitic measure in the city, so almost a year and a half after the entrance of the German army, which is the gathering of Liberty Square. We're going to discuss that. The destruction of the Jewish cemetery a few months later, the imposition of the Yellow Star in February 1943, and then the first train leaves Thessaloniki to Auschwitz on the 15th of March, and by August 1943, there is virtually no Jew left in the city from those 50,000 people that we talked about. Here is a picture of the German army entering the city, being welcomed by some of the local authorities. And here you have the German tanks in front of the seafront of Thessaloniki. You have the White Tower, which is a very important symbol of the city. And here also the tanks under Camara, which is another Roman landmark of the city that you can even see today. Already we have, from those early months, we have some anti-Semitic signs. Here it says in German and in Greek, the Jews are not welcome in this shop. But again, this is not it's not massive measures. It's not like in other countries where initially they start immediately with the measures. And the Jews suffer as much as the rest of the population, but it's not addressed to them completely. So there's no yet mass anti-Semitic measures from the Germans. This changes in July 1942 when the Germans make an announcement to gather all Jews to Liberty Square. It's a very central square in Thessaloniki. They gather around 8,000 to 9,000 Jewish men aged from 18 to 45. And you see pictures from the German army from that period. And in fact, these are the people who fought in the war against Albania. So this is not just Jewish men. These are the heroes of the Greek war against the Italians. And these are the ones who the Germans gathered here. They had to make them wait under the sun. You know how hot it's in Greece in July. for hours. They made them do humiliating gymnastics. If they didn't comply, they would be beaten up. They would throw water on them. And the purpose of this gathering was to register them for slave labor. So they took all these men, and you know, they were teachers, accountants, merchants, storekeepers. You know, they were not heavy laborers, and they made them do construction in ores or in mines or in airports, build railway lines, and many of them in very bad conditions, of course, with very poor nutrition, and many started to die. And when this happened and the first dead people came back to the city, the community decided to take action, and they actually negotiated with the Germans what we call the payment of a ransom. So these are some of the original checks, copies of the original checks, that the community gathered money from its members to pay off those Jewish laborers. And you have in the back side of the check, when it's endorsed, when it's cashed out by the Nazis, you have the signature of Max Merten, who is a very notorious, well-known Nazi, who was commander of civilian affairs of Thessaloniki. I'm going to refer to him later on. So not only they have to destroy the cemetery, they have to pay the ransom, but part of the stipulation of the agreement with the Germans is they also have to destroy the Jewish cemetery, which is located by now in the city center. So that's a picture of the Jewish cemetery. Could have been even the biggest Jewish cemetery in Europe, with maybe 150,000, 200,000 tombs. Very ancient, definitely more than 500 years old. That was how it looked before. That's how it looks in February 1943. These are pictures from the Red Cross delegate in Thessaloniki at the time in his reports to Geneva. It's really rubble, it's bones, it's stones. And this happened even before the deportations. This is with the whole Jewish community present. They didn't even have time to unbury their own dead. And then this is in December 1942, and in February 1943, so again, this is happening in very rapid speed. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the so-called final solution, sends his two people, Dieter Wissilceni and Alois Brunner, who helped by Max Merten, who is I mentioned, responsible for civilian affairs of the city. They put in place all the rules for the genocide of the Jewish people of Thessaloniki. These are some of the copies of the orders. They issue orders constantly. This is 6th of February, 13th of February, requiring all kinds of stuff on properties, on ghettos, on Yellow Star, on registration, on so many different kinds of rules. You have the Yellow Star being introduced immediately after that. These are pictures from Thessaloniki of people wearing the Yellow Star in the city. And the creation of the ghettos. Now, there were two big ghettos created in Thessaloniki. It's important to note that they are not exclusively Jewish, but Christians also live there, but they moved the Jews from other districts to those big areas. So it's one in the city center, the one you see there, and that one is in the east side of the city, which is currently the big residential part of Thessaloniki. And you see the railway station on the left, the Baron, you see the railway station and you see the Baron Hirsch quarter. So you see a square there, which is the Baron Hirsch neighborhood, which becomes the transit ghetto. So it was a neighborhood of very poor Jews. And because of the proximity to the train station, it was the first ones to be deported. But also, after they were deported, they used the camp as a transit camp. So they would move the Jews from the other neighborhoods there, and then from there they would be deported. These are pictures, again, from the Red Cross of Jews moving from other places to the ghettos with their goods. You see here, they're in carts, horse carts. This is a very interesting picture. This was taken in Egnatia Street. It's a big street in modern Thessaloniki. You see the tram lines They're visible. It was taken from the balcony of someone takes it from his own balcony. You can see his sister and father also overlooking. And with the yellow arrow, you actually see the Jews moving to the ghetto. So they cross the whole city from the ghetto, as I showed you in the east, to go to the transit ghetto. And actually the column that you see that you think is the Jews is actually the citizens of Thessaloniki who are working in the city, and they see the Jews, the convoy of the Jews, and they stop to see what's happening, to see if they know somebody. These are the two files of people that you see with the Jews being in the middle. For me, that's a very important photograph to show you a little bit how all these things was taking place back then. This neighborhood, I said, the Baron Hirsch was barricaded, became a ghetto. The Jews had to pay for their own tickets. They had to pay for their own deportation. And these are tickets that have been found, and they're in the Jewish Museum of Thessaloniki. I think they had to pay third class. As if, going in animal carts, it's a class by itself. And from Thessaloniki all the way to Auschwitz, it's a 5 to 8 days trip. And this is a famous bookstore of Thessaloniki, the Molcho bookstore, which doesn't exist anymore, belonged to a Jewish family. And I put this picture because it's also the issue of the Jewish properties, because when all these Jews, the thousands of Jews are deported, it becomes a big issue in the city who will manage all these Jewish properties that are left behind. So there are many custodians of Jewish properties now that are taking over these Jewish properties. And you can see how these all were taken by the Germans and were given to to other friends of theirs. So from the 50,000 Jews that we had in that time, only 2,000 came back after the war. So we say that more than 90% was lost during the Holocaust. Of the 2,000, 800 came back from the camps, 1,200 came back from hiding, mostly either with the resistance in the mountains or with the Christian families all around Greece. The numbers, is very hard, of course, with numbers to be very accurate. Many didn't come back at all. For example, some Holocaust survivor, originally from Thessaloniki, may have met somebody in a displaced person camps and migrated to Australia. It's very hard to count everyone who exactly was saved. So that's why the numbers are approximate. We cannot speak up with certainty. I don't want to leave you with the Holocaust. I want to bring the story to today to show you what has happened since and how the memory of the Holocaust is alive in the city. So these are some photographs of the first survivors coming back to find the destroyed cemetery. You see somebody with a uniform in downtown Thessaloniki. Really, it was a very traumatic experience for them. They come back in a city which they live very comfortably to find none of their friends, their relatives, their family being alive anymore, and also the community institutions destroyed, the synagogues destroyed, their shops, their homes, other people live there. And that's why, again, not many decide to stay there. Many also leave around that time. You have a lot of mass weddings. People find, a young man finds a young woman. They decide to start a new life. You even have pictures of little children in that picture. So whoever is there, every family, they try to create a new families. And here is also some of the orphans that they have to take care of, some community institutions. You have some of these orphans migrate to Israel in 1946. Greece is very poor. The community is poor. They cannot be organized to take care of them. So they go to Palestine. Some of the survivors, again, in the cemetery, trying to save whatever can be saved. The first community services. And this is an interesting period of Greece because you have people of Jewish people who fought with the resistance. In 1946 to 1949, Greece, as if the Second World War and the devastation caused by the Germans was not enough, had a bloody civil war for 3 years. It's the only country in Europe where, following the Second World War, we had a war among Greeks, the left versus the right. And many of these Jews who fought with the resistance and they were saved thanks to the resistance, now they get in trouble by the government because they are branded as communists. Many of them are in prison, they're sent in exile. So again, that's many of them also decide to go to Palestine or to other places just because it was so difficult to live there with the political situation. This is the first effort to document the Holocaust in Greece, published in 1949 by the rabbi of Thessaloniki. Again, the Holocaust back then, nobody wants to listen about the Holocaust. You know, you're in the middle of a bloody civil war. You know, nobody cares about the Holocaust. 1957, Max Merten visits Greece. He appears in a court case for one of his interpreters. He's identified, he's arrested. In 1959, his court case before the Greek military tribunal, where he's condemned to 25 years for different crimes, including the Holocaust. And a few months later, he's released by the Greek government. He's sent to Germany, and Germany has its own court case, and they also release him based on not enough evidence. Greece, as you may know, it's a very poor country back then. Germany is an important economy. Not only Greece wanted to send workers to Germany, but also Greece was exporting a lot of produce to Germany, and a lot of Germans were coming to Greece as tourists. So I think they were worried that every German who will come to Greece will be arrested for war crimes. So Greece passed a law in 1959 that waived its rights to prosecute German war criminals. And this law was only repealed a few years ago. Anyway, and that trial, although, you know, the Jewish community appears before the court case and they testify, and it's a shock for the government because Merten is threatening different ministers with photographs. In the end, nothing happened, but it's really a turbulent period for Greek history. But it doesn't raise awareness again by the wider public about the Holocaust. It's still, the public is not ready to accept the stories of the Holocaust. So this is just a picture from a community commemoration. The commemoration of the Holocaust remains a community affair within the Jewish community itself. It's not yet a public event. And that's in the main synagogue that survived one of these photographs. In 1962, you have the creation also of a Holocaust memorial at the location of the Jewish cemetery, the new Jewish cemetery. So you see there is the army present, there's government officials, but still the memory is within the confines of the Jewish community. And this is a picture of the memorial with some of the notables of the time. 1967 to 1974, we have the military dictatorship of Greece. The banner says, Greece of Greek Christians. Again, not a time for the memory of the Holocaust to come out to the public eye. The Jewish community remains close to itself. The 90s is really the explosion of memory. And in that case, Greece is not unique. In France, for example, the memory of the Holocaust comes out in the 80s. So it's not a trend only for Greece, but it took so long. You have to consider that, you know, the survivors, they want to reconstruct their lives. They wanted to build their lives, the families, the community institutions, their business. Only after they had done so, they felt the need to then speak about the experience. It wasn't something that they could do the day after. It took them a lot of effort and time. And really, the 90s, we have a lot of testimonies of those survivors. But also the society was more willing to listen. And in 1997, we have the inauguration of the monument more than 50 years after the actual fact by the president of Greece, Stephanopoulos, that you see right here. And really, this monument has become a landmark of the city. A year later, the King of Spain, Juan Carlos, visited the monument. Of course, I told you that these are Spanish-speaking Jews, so Spain has always an affinity with that community because it's also holds with it Spanish culture. The Jewish Museum opens up in 2001 to keep the memory of the Jewish community and everything I'll be telling you, and to document and to collect artifacts and to tell the story. 2003, this is the visit of the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartolomeo to the monument. The community has excellent relations with the Orthodox Church, and he's an honorary member of the Jewish community of Thessaloniki, the Patriarch himself. And regularly we participate in interfaith dialogue with the church and really have excellent cooperation. 2004, the Greek Parliament unanimously names 27th of January, the day of liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, as Holocaust Remembrance Day. And since then, every January in Greece, from the parliament to every local authority, to every school, they speak, they learn, they commemorate the Holocaust. 2007, 8, I cannot see, 2006, the monument was, the Holocaust monument that we spoke about, it was in a formerly Jewish district. Now it moved to Liberty Square, where this event took place. So now it's really downtown. Whoever visits Thessaloniki, it's really right in front of the sea, close to the port, in a very important position to commemorate exactly that specific location, which was the first, as I said, the beginning of the end of the community. 2013, they started an annual march from the Liberty Square, from the Holocaust monuments to the old railway station, where thousands of people participate, university students from all the city's universities, the scout movements, local authorities, politicians. It's an annual march of memory that's going on, and to pay homage to the victims of the Holocaust. This is Mayor Boutaris, who I also understand visited Melbourne, and he also visited Sydney, who is the former mayor of Thessaloniki, who did a lot, again, to bring out this memory and to reconcile the city, which is Jewish past. And here he takes the oath of office to his second term, wearing a yellow star to complain the presence of elected members of the Golden Dawn, who were in the city council of Thessaloniki. You know, this neo-Nazi formation that now all of the leaders are in jail, thankfully. But really, he made a lot to keep this memory alive. And in also 2014, we have the inauguration of a monument at the old Jewish cemetery, which is today the University of Thessaloniki, to commemorate this destruction that I spoke about. And again, years since, a lot of school events to commemorate the Holocaust, a lot of these are happening all over Europe, these metal plaques commemorating different names of victims, street names, signs, plaques, a lot of statues. Really, it's a lot of memory and a lot of homage to all these events that I speak about. 2020, it was announced the creation of a Holocaust Museum now of Thessaloniki to tell the story, maybe a sister institution to the one we're here today, and one day, hope. And you see, it has the support of the Greek government. You see the Greek Prime Minister at the time. You see the Israeli Prime Minister. Here you see the President of Israel laying the founding stone. So really, it's a project that both Greece, Israel, Germany, many countries, the US, support. And we hope that at the end of this year, we'll see the beginning of the construction of this museum, and soon it will be in operation. 2021, this is during COVID time. That's why you don't see a lot of cars, but the White Tower, this, as we say, the landmark of Thessaloniki, it's lit up with "We Remember" sign, never again. Again, to show how the city now is part and mourns this part of its community, its population. This is an interesting photograph. This is from last December. It was a friendly game in Thessaloniki between Aris Thessaloniki, one of the traditional teams, historic teams of the city, and Maccabi Haifa, the champions of soccer in Israel. So the two teams played together a friendly game. All the proceeds were given to the Holocaust Museum, but both teams came out with T-shirts saying "United Against Antisemitism." So you see how now the fight against antisemitism and preserving the memory of the Holocaust is also embraced by not only the government, but also by sports community, by the broader civil society. And And this is a quote that I would like to end this presentation with. The lady you see above the banner in the middle of the picture is the president of Greece, Grigoris Apostolopoulos. It's the first woman president of Greece. And she participated in this memorial march that I spoke about a month ago, on the 19th of March, and because it was the occasion for the 80 years of these tragic events. So in her speech, she said, and allow me to quote, she says, "These heinous events mark the life of Thessaloniki and altered violently its rich multicultural identity. It's very important that, in the last years, Thessaloniki has recognized her share of responsibility, has clearly condemned the mistakes of the past in an effort to heal the historical trauma." And I think those words of the president a little bit sort of like summarize the story I told you of how we had these tragic events 80 years ago, but today really the society is doing so much more to keep the memory alive, to learn from the mistakes, and to make sure these things never happen again. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the questions and answers. Susan. But before we do so, I told you I have a little clip I want to show you. So Sue, maybe you want to see the clip. So these are some of my publications, and the second and the third is the Greek version and the English version of this compilation of letters from 3 Jewish mothers that I published, who write from the ghetto of Thessaloniki to their sons who are in Athens. Do not forget me. And during COVID, they want to make it as a play to show it in Thessaloniki. And during COVID, we couldn't show any plays, so they made it a documentary. So I want to play you the end of this documentary, where the president of Greece, Grigoris Apostolopoulos, is actually reading some of these letters. She's reading in Greek with English subtitles.
Χθες το βράδυ μας ειδοποίησαν ότι θα φεύγαμε σήμερα το πρωί. Τώρα δεν ξέρουμε ποια μέρα αυτής της εβδομάδας. Αν δεν είναι αύριο, μέχρι τις 15 πρέπει να φύγουμε. Το βράδυ δεν κοιμάμαι και έχω τη σκέψη μόνο σε εσάς, ότι αυτός ο άσχημος αέρας δεν θα φυσήξει και προς εσάς επίσης. Ο Θεός να φυλάει τα αγαπημένα μου παιδιά, γιατί αν δεν θα ξέρω που είστε, οι σκέψεις μου θα περιπλακούν ακόμη περισσότερο. Πηγαίνετε μια πολύ ωραία επίσκεψη στον Γούζιο και δώστε του τα χαιρετίσματά μου. Αυτός που έκανε τόσα για σας και ακόμη μπορεί. Προσπαθούμε να είμαστε μαζί με την Τζίνα, αλλά δεν ξέρουμε πού θα μας μπλοκάρουνε. Σε κάθε περίπτωση, πιστεύουμε να είμαστε μαζί ή με την Ίντα, που είναι στο ίδιο τετράγωνο με μας. Εγώ είχα το σάκο μου έτοιμο, αλλά δεν είναι πολύ σταθερός και δεν μπορώ να τον σηκώσω. Σήμερα η Τζίνα θα με βοηθήσει να φτιάξω έναν άλλο. Αυτή προσπαθεί να με κάνει να δω τον ορίζοντα λιγότερο μαύρο. Αλλά δεν μπορώ να παρηγορηθώ με τη σκέψη του πότε θα σας ξαναδώ. Ο Θεός κοφεύει στις προσευχές μου, αλλά εγώ ακόμη προσεύχομαι. Ο καιρός εδώ βοηθάει στη μελαγχολία. Αν ο καιρός αλλάξει σε εσάς, γιατί είναι άνοιξη, φυλαχτείτε από το κρυό όσο μπορείτε, γιατί αυτές οι αλλαγές είναι πολύ επικίνδυνες. Να είστε καλά και να είστε πάντα μαζί. Προσπαθήστε να με βρείτε με την Τζίνα, γιατί αυτή η σκέψη με βασανίζει. Πώς θα μάθετε που βρισκόμαστε. Η Τζίνα έχει καλύτερη διάθεση κάποιες φορές και με ανεβάζει λίγο. Ο Θεός να σας φυλάει και να μας ξανασμίξει όλους με καλή υγεία. Σας φιλώ με όλη μου την καρδιά, με όλη μου την ψυχή. Μη με ξεχάσετε, πολύ αγαπημένα μου παιδιά. Ο καλός Θεός ας δείξει επιτέλους έλεος στους αθώους που επιθυμούν μόνο μια απλή ζωή με την οικογένειά τους. Ο Θεός να σας φυλάει και να σας προστατεύει από όλα τα κακά. Η μητέρα σας, η οποία έχει μόνο μια σκέψη, να δει τα παιδιά της υγιή. Η Τζίνα θα σας γράψει. Η μητέρα σας, Νεάμα.
So question, I can't see. Sorry.
It's always me, it's Beck.
Oh, hi Beck. Hi Beck.
That was very enlightening, very interesting. So my question is, when they returned, the survivors, is there any information regarding the anti-Semitic kind of outlook when they returned, like how it was for them when they came back? Did it shift much, or were they accepted back into the community, or was there still hostility towards them?
An important question. It wasn't an easy return. As I say, that's why I also try to show you in my presentation, the city is also rapidly changing during that time, with a lot of migration waves, economic uncertainty, and the Holocaust is, for most of the population and the German occupation, one of the calamities that fell upon them. That seemed to be like every 5-10 years they had another one. And many of the Greek Christians from the countryside moved to Thessaloniki and found housing, and much of that housing they found was the vacated Jewish homes. So when the Jews come, of course, the people who live there, they're not very happy that they came. And we have survivors that told us that, they said, I wish you had where you were killed and didn't come back to claim back your house or your business. But many of them were able to reunite with all the old friends. They were able to start again new lives. It was a difficult period, but also it's a period that hasn't been, I think in general, hasn't been studied that much because we focus so much on the Holocaust itself, which also the return and the reconstruction of Jewish life after the war, it's also very telling about different societies. That's why I wanted to continue my narration until today, because if I only finished in 1945, you wouldn't get the perspective that I try to show you of what has happened since and the efforts done currently, etc. So, yes. We have another question there, I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Leon, for really a wonderful presentation. It's part of my family's history, escaping Spain in Salonika, then Egypt. Now, my question is, you mentioned the Golden Dawn.
Yes.
And I am aware of an incident where the mayor, Boutaris, was speaking publicly and was attacked and was taken to hospital. What is the situation now with the anti-Semitism in Greece, in Thessaloniki? Thank you.
The emergence of the Golden Dawn, which came during the Greek economic crisis, and of course they exploited the economic crisis, they exploited migration to have their populist talk and arguments. But really the rise of Golden Dawn and what they did, having members of parliament attack democracy within the House of Parliament, it was ridiculous. It really shocked Greek public opinion, and it shocked the Greek political parties. So for many years, I tried to show you the Holocaust was never taken seriously in Greek, was never felt to be part of the Greek collective history and memory. But really, I think with the rise of the Golden Dawn, the Greek political establishment, the Greek leaders got a big shock, and they realized that what they had marginalized and what they have forgotten, ignored for many decades, gave, food to this monster that actually was denying openly the Holocaust and utilizing anti-Semitic speech to attack Greece and the Greek rule of law and the Greek institutions themselves. And since then, the Greek government has really put forward a big effort to educate young people at school. And as I said, they passed a law for Holocaust remembrance and done a lot of things. In the meantime, they found out that the Golden Dawn was responsible for assassinating not only migrants but also Greek activists, human rights activists. And following that, the government was able to create a court case, whereas now all the leadership of Golden Dawn is in jail, which is a breakthrough really never happened in Europe, to throw up the whole party in jail. And now we have elections next month, and there are some of the spin-offs of Golden Dawn, and still now the government tries to ban them as well. Unfortunately, the spin-offs, one of them is head by the former vice president of the Greek Supreme Court. That shows you that this ideology is not really marginal, but it's also endorsed by some elements of people who you would think we know better, like a Supreme Court justice. So that's really the most extreme case of anti-Semitism. When I'm asked, and I gave an interview to Neos Cosmos, maybe you'll read it tomorrow, about anti-Semitism in Greece, I say, unfortunately, it's there, like of course, in many other places. It's not violent. It's more what I call anti-Semitism of the coffee house, or when you take a taxi in Greece, you ask them a political question, and after 5 minutes, they'll speak about conspiracies and the Jews and the Freemasons and I don't know what. So that's the type of anti-Semitic discourse we have often in Greece. It's very conspirational. It's sort of like based on a victimhood, feelings of victimhood. It's not racial like the Nazi one. It's not radical like, say, the Islamic one, but still widespread. And again, we saw it with COVID, for example. Much of the resistance to the vaccines and to all these things was based on this conspirational anti-Semitic thinking. So the government realized that you cannot have citizens, responsible citizens, who vote and participate in political life if they believe in that kinds of fallacies. So this is part of the efforts of what the government is trying now to erase from modern Greece. We have already a gentleman with a microphone. Yes.
I know that Thessaloniki has always had a large Muslim population, and I believe there's a very harmonious relationship between that population and the Jewish one.
Which population? I didn't hear.
Muslim?
Muslims, yes, okay.
How did that play out after the war, after the Holocaust?
So, the big Muslim population of Thessaloniki, they were sent to Turkey in 1923 with exchange populations. So really, since 1923, there's not a single Muslim living in Thessaloniki. What changed is in the 90s, we had the influx of Albanian immigrants, many of them being Muslims themselves, and now others, of course, Syrians, Pakistanis, many other refugee groups. But with the Jewish community, there hasn't been an incident with these kinds of populations. Recently, though, last month, the Greek police, you may have read it in the newspapers, they arrested 2 Pakistani immigrants in Greece who were enlisted by Iran to kill Jews in a restaurant, the Jewish restaurant in Athens. And they were trying to kill as much as 50 people there. And they were only arrested last month. But again, this was directed by Iran, so I don't think it's like, I cannot claim it as sort of like indigenous anti-Muslim anti-Semitism. This was really driven by Iran, and we're just looking for some poor people who would execute these attacks. We have one there in the back.
Thank you. First of all, a fantastic lecture, Leon, but let me tell you that Golden Dawn had reared its ugly head in Australia too a few years ago, both in Melbourne and Sydney. Thankfully, it looks like it's gone underground, but as you said, it never goes away. It appears in different formats, just like it is now in Greece. I was lucky enough to spend some of my time in Greece and some of my time in Australia during my younger days, And it's sad that during my 12 years of education, not one word was ever mentioned about the Jewish plight in Greek history. And that's indicative of how Greece does its history. The Civil War wasn't taught until the 80s or 90s, but it's a pity that that was happening until now, and I'm very, very thankful and grateful that at least now the Greeks that don't live in Thessaloniki realise that there was an issue in Thessaloniki. Most Greeks now probably don't even know about that history, which is really, really sad 80 years later. And the question that I want to make, that I want to ask you, is the issue of land ownership, because you mentioned that there was a vast... In 1943, you said there was still a large population that left, and of course left their houses, left their land. And you mentioned that the Germans gave this land to certain people, obviously people, their allies, their friends, their co-conspirators, I'm not too sure. Some of them, some Jewish people came back. Did they contest that land? Is there a history behind that? Because you're obviously talking about a huge amount of property in the middle of Thessaloniki, valuable land that obviously belongs now to someone else. And I'm sure, is there something happening within the Greek society for the people whose land was theirs to claim it back?
Thank you so much for this question. There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, the Greek Consul General in Sydney invited me exactly for this reason. He said it's important that the Greek community knows about this history, because this is Greek history, what I told you. So it's history that everybody should know, and that's why he invited me to come to Australia to talk to audiences and to meet people and to raise awareness about that part of Greek history. Now, the issue of the property is a very complex one, as you understand. Greece, immediately following the war, they passed a law that gave the right to Jewish survivors to claim property that belonged to up until 6 degrees of family members. So survivors could claim up to 6 degrees of family members as heirs to the property. The problem is that when you went to the court, again, it's civil war, so you know it's a huge instability. It's very ineffective, the whole system. And they asked you for the death certificate. You know, go find a death certificate from Auschwitz. So for many people, yes, they could claim the land, but it was expensive. It took long. The custodians, these were Greek Orthodox people who had this property. Of course, they didn't want to give it out. They even made unions, which influenced members of parliament. So, you know, it was a struggle. Very few were returned initially, the first years. And also at the same time, Greece established an organization, a Jewish-run organization. I will translate it in simple terms, the Organization for the Rehabilitation of the Jews of Greece, which became the heir of all the other properties. So this organization, according to the Greek law, is the heir of all Jewish property in Greece that has been claimed by the survivors up to the 6th degree. Still exists today. Till today they find properties from, you know, now in Greece, only recently did we start to make a national registry of land. So only now can you really identify which plots of land belong to whom. And now much of that is returning to either families or to this organization that is then being given to charity or to support community life or to other. But of course, you know, my answer to you is a simple one. There are books and volumes written about it, and this is only the land property. We don't speak about the movable property. You know, what happens to merchandise, to furniture, to, you know, bank accounts. It's a very complex, bank deposits, a very complex story that I think now it's being written by the researchers.
Leon, thank you for that excellent presentation. I found quite, let's say, surprising your comments about Metaxas, the dictator Metaxas, his sympathetic overtures towards the Jewish community, because at the same time you could find reasons why he wouldn't be sympathetic, as Jews being the spreaders of socialist and communist ideas, and we know during his period of time he banned the Communist Party, he persecuted communists as well. Jews were involved in the founding of the Greek Communist Party as well. Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, as I say, he was an interesting figure, Metaxas. And for some reason, he although he was admiring Mussolini, and you saw some of the images I showed you, he still wasn't anti-Semitic. I think, again, there are academics who have written more substantial work about Metaxas. My thought would be that he felt that they're Greek citizens. And as long as they were abiding by the law, and they were paying the taxes and serving in the military, they have equal rights with everybody else. And that's what he did. And actually, when he banned these organizations, he didn't just ban the extreme right organizations, he banned every organization. He was very anti-civil society, very, But for some reason, I think he felt that they are part of Greece and they have to be treated as Greeks. That's my simplistic explanation. No, definitely. That's why I present it as, because he also preceded immediately the Second World War. If it was, for example, an openly fascist leader, maybe Jews would have migrated in mass, have left Greece at the time. But they didn't. Not only they didn't leave, but they fought courageously because they really felt part of the Greek society at the time, which is interesting as a historical process.
Thank you, Leon, for your wonderful presentation. Now, I'd like to hear if you have captured any stories regarding the Greeks who helped protect the Jews during the Second World War, which I know that in the villages that happened extensively, and I actually have patients who've told me of their own childhood where their entire village was exterminated because they were protecting Jews. And I find that that's a really important part of the history and the story that should be captured too. Indeed.
And I only spoke about, of course, Thessaloniki here. You have Jews living in more than 25 different cities in Greece. I only focus on Thessaloniki just because of its important role and prominence in the Greek Jewish world. But of course, you have stories all across the country. I think, again, in the case of Thessaloniki, it's important to mention Archbishop Damaskinos, who was the head of the Greek Church at the time. And when these events were happening in Thessaloniki, he rallied the elites of Greece, of Athens, of the heads of their union, the associations, the political actors, and had multiple complaints, public letters to the Germans to stop these deportations. And with the event with the Sydney, when we had Archbishop Makarios, he honored many of these bishops who stood up against the Nazis. In my research, however, I found that Athens did so much to speak out for the Jews. Salonika did much less. During the same time, for example, you didn't have those letters coming from the citizens of Thessaloniki. You had a lot coming from the citizens of Athens, led by the church. Thessaloniki, things were a bit more passive. But expanding on your question, we have a lot of stories from Jews of Thessaloniki who hid in the different villages you mentioned, or Jews from other cities. The deportations in the rest of Greece happened in March 1944, so a year later. So Jews know what happened in Thessaloniki, and the moment they see the Germans taking over the rest of the country and they're starting to have anti-Semitic measures, they really flee, and they are able to find shelter in many Greek Christian homes. And you have around 300 righteous Gentiles, as we call them, recognized by Yad Vashem, who are people who saved Jews during the Holocaust in Greece by putting their own lives in danger.
Got one back here.
Leon, Sikaritia, Mazel Tov on the presentation. I saw in your Second World War map on the ghettos, it's ironic that the Gestapo Jewish Affair Office was located right next to the POW camp of the Allies who were captured in Greece in 1941. We know from many other stories about the Thessalonican Jewish, Greek veterans and their participation in the sort of commando uprising in Auschwitz. But this day, today in 1941, after the Battle of Kalamata, down south in the evacuation ports, there were hundreds of Jewish volunteers who joined the British Allies, including a lot of Salonican port authorities who were the main people offloading all the ships for the British Allies. And hundreds were captured in Kalamata, including, if Aaron Segal is in here, I can't see Aaron Segal, one of Melbourne's family's uncles at that time. In the Australian military records over here, there's an account of a Greek-speaking Jew who led 300 Australian soldiers out of Kalamata to escape and evacuate, and escape Nazi prisoner camps. What do we know about basically the Greek, Salonican, or other areas of Greece, the volunteers who came back to Greece with the British, fought the Nazis there, and then joined the resistance, as a lot of stories account. But neither the Australian or Greek, really talk about those Jews who returned from Eretz Israel to fight the Nazis, who they knew, what they were doing there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for this, and thank you also on the eve of Anzac Day that you shared this story. It's very meaningful. Thank you. It's also another, there are so many chapters, and all your questions raise so many important chapters that each one of them is 10 PhDs to settle. And you ask me questions, and I don't always have the information to actually accurately answer. There was indeed this Palestine division that was created by volunteers to go and fight, and many of them were Jews that were settled in Palestine, and many of them were Greek Jews. Many of them were captured by the Germans, but as they were soldiers, they didn't go to concentration camps, they went to prisoner of war camps. Of course, as Jews, they were treated inferiorly, but still better than normal Jews because they were part of the British army. What is interesting is that many of these both allied troops, because you have a lot of British troops, because the moment England sends a lot of troops to help the Greek effort against the Germans, and when the front collapses, many of these British troops and Anzac troops and allied troops are left in Greece without any help. So there are many networks established to take them out of Greece, including by boat from Greek islands outside of Athens to Turkey, and from there down to Egypt or to Palestine, to the NATO, to the Allied military headquarters. And many of these networks also were used for Jews to flee Greece at the same time. And there has been some research about that as well. But it's a very complex issue that I think still we are waiting for a more definite volume on the story of all these Allied soldiers and also Jewish soldiers coming from Palestine. Many of them did also fight with the communist resistance, and they trained them and they helped them do a lot of the sabotage work. It's a very rich history that it's important to be told.
So we've only got time for one more question. Maya, I think. Yeah. You need a... Oh. Oh.
Maybe we take the three all together?
Okay, yeah, good idea.
Take the last three together.
This one won't be too complicated. Just considering that Greece has got a Jewish history as long as one of the longest Jewish histories, is there a future for Jews in Greece? Do the young stay there and or move away? I was in Thessaloniki about 10 years ago, and I got the impression that a lot of young people maybe weren't staying, but I don't know if that's how widespread that is. But I'm just curious, considering the history, what's the future like?
Yeah. So we have one there and one there.
Thank you for the talk. My question is, the Greek Church has got a peculiar position in Greek history, modern history. It's entwined itself culturally into the country, but yet it seemed to behave differently during the Second World War and now as well. Can you give us a picture of where it is and its relationship with the Jewish community.
Did you want to take one more?
One there, the lady there.
Thank you, Leon, for your presentation. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. I just wanted to ask, with the slides that you had in regards to Jewish migration back in the 14th century and even before that to Greece, especially to the Peloponnese, was there a huge Jewish population within the Peloponnese in regards to Kalamata, Patra, Sparti, Napoli, down south?
I think there's more than one.
And these are difficult questions.
Is he meant to remember them all?
Just one question. The Jews of Yanina and their relationship with the Greeks of Yanina, and the stories that I have heard through my family is that they were very well protected in certain parts of the northern part of Epirus.
So you have a lot of questions, and again, you know, how much time do we have, Sue? I'll try to briefly touch what you raised. You know, the future of Jews in Greece, you know, I don't live in Greece. My brother lives in Greece. You know, he has his family there. So I think that's the case of many modern Greeks. You know, with the economic situation, many young people left. Here in Australia, everybody I hear speaking Greek is people who came recently to Australia. It's not the old migration waves. So I think that's true for Greece. And, you know, now we're all part of a unified Europe. It's very easy to move in and out. For now, many have left, but I think eventually they'll come back, or I hope they will come back. And somehow Jewish life in Greece is still vibrant and active. Although small in number, I think we still have a very rich Jewish life. And now we have a lot of tourism coming from Israel, from the States, from European countries, which also help the numbers and help stimulate more Jewish life. About Yanina, you know, Yanina is a very interesting community. They were Greek speakers. And they were very well integrated. Unfortunately, during the war, they also had more than 90% loss in Yanina, which is a very sad story because you would think that if there were Greek speakers, they could very easily hide and be protected. What's interesting with Yanina, you have now really less than 50 Jews living in Yanina, but we had the first Jewish mayor being elected. He was the mayor of Yanina. Extraordinary individual. He was professor of medicine, a very well-respected Jewish leader, but also a community leader in Yanina, who unfortunately passed away a couple of months ago from at a very relatively young age, which is really a force for a renewal in the city of Yanina, embraced really by everybody there. Now, the role of the church, you know, maybe the Greek leaders here know more than I do. You know, yes, it's like, you know, to be Greek, it's very much intertwined with the Greek church. You know, a lot of the Greek community here, it's the Greek church that runs the schools, runs the churches. It's similar a little bit to the Jewish life in the sense that somehow Israel is now the center of Jewish life. And, you know, the rabbinate in Israel decides who is a Jew, and it's with troubles, of course. But it's a bit similar in that concept that with the mothership and you know, the religion is very much intertwined with the sense of nationhood, of peoplehood. I think the church, and I spoke to it, and with the Greek, the Patriarchate and the Greek Church, they also want to move on and modernize also the clergy and their people. It remains, some parts of the population remain a bit very traditional and not open-minded, but I think the majority of the population is moving on as the world is moving on. There was one more question. Yes, so there were communities in the Peloponnese, and there were communities even in Patras. You know, when the Greek Revolution happened in 1821, some of these populations were targeted by the revolutionaries because they felt they were close to the Turks. So many of them moved out of the Peloponnese to go to other places. But you had, until the Second World War, you had communities in Patras especially. But they were very few numbers, and Athens was very close, and they all moved to Athens. If you visit the Jewish Museum of Athens, the synagogue of Patras is within the Jewish Museum of Athens. So you have that has been rescued there.
Thank you for those questions. I had a whole list, but oops. But I won't ask them. But Leon, 90 seconds. What are you doing today at the World Jewish Congress and the UN? Do you want to tell them?
Sure. So, again, thank you all for the welcome. Thank you for the questions. You raised a lot of things. Hope I gave you some convincing answers. But at least you learned something. You went on this journey with me. That's a little bit my personal journey, my academic journey. But professionally, I work for the World Jewish Congress. The World Jewish Congress, let's say it's the third level of representation of the Jewish people. You have the level of the Jewish community, so the Jewish Community Council of Melbourne. You have the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, which is the umbrella of all the Jewish organizations of the Jewish communities of Australia. And then there are affiliate of the World Jewish Congress. So I represent, let's say, the Jewish communities to the United Nations. And our main areas of focus is the fight against antisemitism, preservation of the memory of the Holocaust, but also interfaith dialogue, facilitating, helping Jewish communities around the world, and also supporting the State of Israel as the heart now of Jewish communal life around the world. You told me 90 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Simon Holloway, who is the Director of Education at the Melbourne Holocaust Museum, to do the farewell and thanks.
Leon, I just want to thank you so much for such an incredibly powerful and captivating lecture. The history of Jews in Thessaloniki, of course, is so incredibly sad, but as we have heard this evening, so terribly important. I want to thank Sue as well for, I might put this down, I think there's a little bit of feedback. I want to thank Sue as well very much for your role in arranging for this evening, as well as everybody who was engaged in organising tonight. And I want to thank all of you very much for coming out this evening. Before we do finish up tonight, I did just want to mention that on the 30th of this month, one of our incredible survivors is going to be speaking here. You can register online to hear John Lemovy share his experiences in the Holocaust in France. And I also want to just draw your attention to the fact that we are now coming up to our capital appeal. And of course, remarkable events like this evening's can only happen with your support. And would like to encourage people to please do donate in order to ensure that we can continue to preserve and to record and to educate about the Holocaust into the future. I'm told that this QR code that we have over here takes one directly to that page, so feel free to take your phones out and make sure that it works. I want to thank you all very much this evening. Leon, I want to thank you very much again.